Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, honorable guests, and welcome to the German Council on Foreign Relations. My name is Kira Finke. I'm the head of the Center for Climate and Foreign Policy. It is my great pleasure to welcome State Secretary Jennifer Morgan back to the German Council on Foreign Relations, and we really thank you for your time. We are particularly grateful that you can join us upon your return from COP28, which just concluded in Dubai last week. We are excited that you will share your insights and perspectives on the negotiations. We also welcome all guests, members, and friends of the DGAP and thank them for their interest in this event, which is called Dialogue Process on the Federal Government's Climate Foreign Policy Strategy, discussion event following COP28. This marks the last event of the year for DGAP and also the one with the longest title. So. We appreciate that you all made it the time to attend these busy days right before the holidays. This event marks the public conclusion of our project dialogue process on a strategy for climate foreign policy at the German Council on Foreign Relations. The central element of this dialogue process is a series of events focused on strategic issues of foreign climate policy. In addition to the green transformation and the need for the decarbonization of industry and its foreign and geopolitical implications, topics discussed included adaptation to climate impacts and the growing importance of loss and damages related to climate change. Today marks the fourth and final event of this project, and we had 3 prior events where we hosted workshops in different formats in the 2022 and this year. Many of our guests who are with us today have also attended prior workshops, and we thank them for your engagement and interest in this process. The dialogue process has accompanied the development of the first ever German climate foreign policy strategy by the federal government. We have brought together stakeholders from civil society, research, business, and also implementing organizations. So we gathered to discuss the international dimensions of the climate crisis and how Germany may position itself to address it. We would very much like to thank Germany's Federal Foreign Office for the support for our project and the cooperation over the last year. The Climate Foreign Policy Strategy was just published on 6th of December this year, and findings from our project have informed the strategy process, and we look forward to now continuing the conversation about instruments of implementation for this strategy in the future. Today's event is focused on the negotiations and the outcomes of the international climate negotiations COP28 held in Dubai in the first half of December. While some have judged the global stocktake text as a breakthrough, especially the wording on transitioning away from fossil fuels, some other external observers wondered what it has been all about the 3 last decades, if not about the phase out of fossil fuels. Another landmark on the first day of negotiations was the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, which was kickstarted through a diplomatic move by United Arab Emirates and Germany, which both committed 100 million euros. Why this pledge was significant, despite its relatively small size, will also be a topic for today. We will, however, not only assess what happened, but also what is next and what is needed. We look forward to this timely exchange with a keynote from the State Secretary and a subsequent panel discussion with international experts. I now hand over to our moderator for today, Ms. Sarah Schurmann, who is a journalist and author of a book called Klartext Klima, which could be translated as Clear Text Climate or Speaking Straight on the Climate Issue. I hope this open and direct language, this heads-on approach to the topic will also guide our discussion today.
Hello and a warm welcome to all guests and members of the DGAP. Also from my side, I'm really looking forward to this discussion because yeah, as we already heard, it's really controversial, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights and your assessment of what came out of there. And so I don't want to take up much time. I'm just going to hand over to Jennifer Morgan for your keynote, and I'm really interested to hear what you, perceived there.
Well, dear friends and dear colleagues, first of all, a big thanks to DGAP and to Kira Vinke and your team for this invitation, but also for accompanying us along the way on our climate foreign policy, which was released also during the COP. It was quite an eventful couple of weeks. But it's really wonderful to be here also with panelists as well. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts, because I think reflecting on the outcomes of COP28 will take some time. And it's really important that we listen to each other and see, okay, well, what did you hear in this text? What did I hear in this text? And how do we move it forward? So, but I think it's fair to say that it was a pivotal moment in the global effort to combat the global climate crisis. And, want to share a few thoughts of what it means for our climate foreign policy moving forward. First of all, at COP28, I think the world very much has united behind the commitment to limit global warming to the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway. And now we need to deliver on that promise of Dubai, and even move beyond it to secure not just this intention, but the reality of keeping 1.5 degrees C in reach this decade. COP28 marked, indeed, I think, a historic shift while also not being enough, which sounds a bit odd. But I think it was a historic shift because it was the first climate summit where nations globally pledged to move away from fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal in a just, orderly, and equitable manner, very important words for the decision, and recognizing the urgent need for a transformative change. This is indeed a major milestone for climate action. It shows that the global community is taking the challenge of climate change seriously, and also that multilateralism, while being very cumbersome, but COP28, I think, has shown that even in times of geopolitical turbulence, that it can work. And that, I think, is another kind of side outcome of COP28, which is not to be taken lightly. Germany and the European Union played a pivotal role in fostering a sense of confidence and trust among nations, transcending the different and diverse perspectives, and building alliances across continents and negotiating blocs. And in the following few moments, I'd like to outline the main outcomes of the COP, along with the key themes of the negotiations, and what it means really for the implementation of our climate foreign policy strategy moving forward. I have to start with, of course, the Loss and Damage Fund. From the 2021 Petersburg Climate Dialogue, Germany championed a better approach for loss and damage, and I think we were the first developed country. Of course, developing countries, and particularly the most vulnerable, had been championing this for over 30 years. But I think it's fair to say that we were the first developed country that really opened political space for this discussion. And I was very proud to work with Maísa Rojas from Chile to co-facilitate the decision on Loss and Damage Fund and funding arrangement last year. And our joint Foreign Office and Development Office, AABMZ team, I think together with Ireland and the EU we're at the forefront of building bridges for a successful TC outcome. And there I would talk about a bit of the shared leadership model that we also had in our approach. And this all paid off in Dubai when, following the months of negotiations. Also, Team Deutschland approach here, State Secretary Vlasbach with the EU, UAE, were able to not only adopt the Loss and Damage Fund on day one. We all thought this is the thing that we should do, is get this done on day one, but kick off the capitalization of that fund with a matched $100 million each, which kicked off a snowballing of much greater contributions than expected, especially from France and Italy. I know I was in the room and all of a sudden it was like, Italy has pledged 100 million euros. Wow, No, I mean, that snowballing effect. And I think the historic early adoption and the capitalization of the loss and damage fund, well, it changed the dynamics of the negotiations in three ways. First of all, loss and damage was removed from a transactional hostage taking that could have played out the whole 2 weeks. But instead, there's a phrase in German, I saw really a stone fall from the hearts. That just captures it for me, of particularly the island states and the most vulnerable, the LDCs, because rather than fighting for this fund and secure the fund and their efforts, they could focus their efforts on demanding a higher ambition outcome across the global stock take. Second, I think with the match contribution with UAE and Germany, we were able to cross the line in the sand on finance from developing versus emerging countries. And this is a key precedent as we look forward in next year's COP and the new post-2025 climate finance goal negotiations, where we're going to have to agree a goal for all wealthy nations, no matter how they were characterized in 1992. This will be very challenging, but this matching launch was also very important for that. And third, I think we created a positive tone from the beginning of the COP, and that incentivized also the COP presidency to match that with the successful negotiation outcome for a decision for the global stocktake at the end of the COP. So looking forward on this part of the outcome, well, we will be working, we have to work with the most vulnerable to better protect their citizens and their communities from the impact of climate change. This remains at the heart of our climate foreign policy strategy. And there's much we will do moving forward beyond, of course, getting the board set up and getting all the governance moving. Just two specific examples. First, working with partners, including through the Global Shield, we want to help ensure that all people and communities are covered by early warning systems by 2027. This is an aim that we find both in our climate foreign policy strategy and the COP28 outcomes, and also working part of the CSET coalition, which Germany co-chairs with Tuvalu. Whether it be in the Pacific, in Hamburg, or in New York, we are working to enshrine the understanding that registered territorial boundaries and marine rights remain unchanged despite sea level rise. And that secures the sovereign and economic rights of small island nations seeing their land consumed by the waves. This is a very important, I was at the Pacific Island Forum, very important outcome, which we will stay on it with those countries. The fossil fuel phase out. Okay, what happened there? Well, I think the unequivocal acknowledgement of the necessity to transition away from fossil fuels by 2050 does define a new era. The COP28 decision sends a resounding message that fossil fuels are no longer a secure investment in the long run, and that every bridge has an end. And addressing the concerns from countries like South Africa or like Colombia, who grapple understandably, just like us, but even more intensively in their development stage with managing this phase out of the fiscal consequences, that was paramount and obviously remains paramount as we move forward. There's much more to be done there. So the next steps there, well, looking ahead, it's clear we want to make in our partnerships a space to discuss and support socially just transitions, knowing from our experiences here in Germany that the transition will only work if citizens come along. We also know that we need to deepen our dialogue with developing country petrostates, those who, unlike the US or Canada, don't have the means or capacity to diversify their economies while securing social services and a good life for their publics. Then the evolution of renewable energy. I think we have to appreciate the journey that we've been on from the struggles of 2015, where the enhanced deployment of renewable energy only made it into the preamble of the cover decision, but not even into the main text of the Paris Agreement. And 8 years later, renewables have now been globally acknowledged as a linchpin for climate action and justice, and alongside energy efficiency, the central pillar for halving emissions by 2030. And the binding global targets set, tripling renewables and doubling efficiency by 2030, I think epitomize our shared commitment. These are the only quantified goals. I think that's very important to note in this text that have been set. So next steps there, obviously a central part of our climate foreign policy will be the capacity building and technological cooperation to enable all countries of this world to contribute to and benefit from these global goals. be it through the continued work with African nations and IRENA and the Accelerated Partnership for Renewables in Africa that was launched by President Ruto from Kenya and Chancellor Scholz, or through the continued expansion of the Green Guarantees Group that was launched at COP28 to drive down the cost of capital around the world, or the discussions with the EU about how to best complement the 2.3 billion euros that was announced by President von der Leyen as part of the Global Gateway, how that can be channeled into energy transition and renewable projects over the next 2 years, or considerations how we want to use the upcoming Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue in March here in Berlin and the Petersburg Climate Dialogue, really to accelerate the implementation of the goals. But it wasn't only about mitigation. We know that adaptation was a top priority for developing countries. When I was in Vanuatu, I said, what's your top priority? It was resilience. It was resilience, right? So I think there, we had the 1.5 goal called by the presidency as the North Star, but our COP28 also produced a complementary Southern Cross, as our Chilean partners called it, which I thought was great. And I think we have a clear roadmap for that adaptation with a framework for the global goal on adaptation finally agreed. It emphasizes the necessity of tackling the global climate crisis collectively, and that Southern Cross enshrines with specific targets for early warning systems by 2027 and for adaptation more generally by 2030, really trying to get into what it really means in the real world. So climate resilient water supply and sanitation, climate resilient food and agriculture systems, health impacts and health services, ecosystems and biodiversity, infrastructure, poverty eradication and livelihoods, and protecting the cultural heritage of states. And so for implementation, the adaptation policy cycle is strengthened. We need to work really hard on that. It's highly complex, but we need to move forward on that. And also more transparency on the roadmap to the doubling of adaptation finance was also quite important. And so that can also be providing confidence on that, and Germany's very committed to drive that forward. And then, of course, financial contributions and the infrastructure of all, because we know that the transformations that we're talking about across our whole economy will only be possible if we collectively crack the challenge of mobilizing the trillions, the shifting and the mobilizing from fossil to clean, from non-resilient to resilient, to meet development and climate goals together. And this is why it's critical that COP28's decisions also open discussions not only on international climate finance, and this was key, but on the broader international reforms of international financial architecture that is necessary to underpin the transition. So on the climate finance side, Germany achieved a new record in our international climate finance for 2022, allocating a total of 6.39 billion euros from its budget for climate action and adaptation in developing countries. This was very good. It surpasses our annual target that what we had set for 2025. And that was significant. But alongside our own contributions, I think I also want to highlight the importance of the work that I and our teams in the Development Ministry and BAMSED and in the Federal Foreign Office have played in coordinating our donors around, for example, the 100 billion goal. Working with the Canadian Environment Minister, we could finally, through OECD reporting and verification, affirm that the OECD expects if it hasn't been met in 2022, it will then be met in 2023. Too late, yes, but finally I think it is there. The successful Green Climate Fund replenishment, which crossed the mobilization goal of $10 billion during the COP, and also the reform of the GCF to improve access and dedicated resources for capacity building, very big priorities for our developing country partners. And so I think looking forward, and this is one of the key things we need to focus on for the coming year, coming months, coming days, there will always be a need for the hardcore of public climate finance. That is key. But it's clear that we also need to consider a variety of sources and strategies for better mobilizing private finance and be more strategic about where we use concessional finance and grants as we prepare to decide the post-2025 finance goal at COP29 in Baku, and addressing the concerns about how to access fair and affordable financing, both in the smaller quantities that are so important as is needed in the SIDS, or at the large scale that's needed for significant infrastructure investment in Latin America, Africa, and Asia is critical. And I think we all know that the international finance system still contains perverse incentives. Some banks, I think, have woken up to the risks of climate change and structure their lendings accordingly. But if a country announces, for example, we heard this often from Colombia, that it wants to phase out fossil fuel exports and switch to exporting renewable energy, its credit rating today is still lowered by the rating agencies, and its interest rates rise. And this needs to change if we are going to shift the trillions. So alongside the process to find the new goal, I think this convergence of a new task force for climate finance mobilization in the Brazilian G20, very important, and the new roadmap to Mission 1.5, which one can find at the end of the text if one reads carefully, very important. The activities under the UAE, the Azerbaijani, and the Brazilian presidencies. This is all meant to enhance the enabling environment for ambition and should be used to concretize and start implementing the needed reforms. And we very much look forward to working with all of them, but particularly also during the COP, we had our government consultations with Brazil, and they're formally also launched the Strategic Dialogue for Climate Ambition and Action, which is meant to support, to work, not support, but work together with Brazil for the 2 presidencies that they now have in front of them. Also, together with BMWK and BMUFAO, we've also launched a new thematic call under our International Climate Initiative. And there we have 13 thematic priority areas. And certainly the announcement by Ajay Banga at the World Bank that the World Bank will be devoting 45% of its annual financing to climate by 2025. It's an important shift that clearly other regional and national development banks should follow to ensure that we're financing climate resilient and climate neutral development. And last but not least, certainly not least, is, this year was not only about 2030. We had a big focus on 2030 because we know that we have to reduce emissions by 43% by 2030 to keep 1.5 in sight, but also on the agenda was the next round of NDCs. And that also, I think we have good, clear guidance. By 2025, all parties, with the exception, of course, of some LDCs and SIDS, are asked to present economy-wide all greenhouse gas climate targets for 2035. All parties are invited to revisit their 2030 NDCs to ensure they are in line with the Paris temperature goals. And all countries will now need to decide how and if to reflect their contributions to the global goals that we've just set ourselves in Dubai in their coming national targets and their planning. These are going to be central elements for discussion in our climate partnerships and for our core climate embassies in 2024 and beyond. So I think, let me just wrap up by underlining the historic significance of COP28. I think not only a testament to progress on climate change, but also a beacon of hope in challenging geoeconomical times. And now we know that, as I said at the beginning, it's historic, but it's not enough. And I think the small islands made that very clear at the end with the Samoan intervention. And I know, having worked closely with them, that this outcome for them does not mean that their islands will not disappear. And that's why we have to, the day after the COP, well, we already started looking at how we implement, how we accelerate, how we work together. And that we have to be honest about that because the real work really lies ahead. I think the success hinges very much on collaboration and on trust. These resolutions now must be translated into action and economic policy and infrastructure, investments, financial reform and action, and German climate partnerships. And that is the core of our climate foreign policy moving forward. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm really, really lucky that you talk so fast because you covered most of the factual questions I had. So we can get to the interesting or more juicy ones. And I'd like to get back to what you said about, okay, it's historic, but it's not enough. And like you being for so long in this climate field, I'd really be interested in the broader thing, like what can you expect from a COP and what do you expect from a COP and what not?
Well, I mean, I think maybe to unpack that sentence, I think it's historic because the COPs have not before really gone into the real economy. And that's what's different this time. Naming the transition away from fossil fuels, having global targets on renewables and energy efficiency, that gets much more into actually national implementation. It's that collective and national mix. And that, I think, is historic. And you had a vast majority of countries, a supermajority, which were willing to go even further. We're ready to go with the phase out of fossil fuels, but we are in a collaborative process and a consensus-based process. So of course, that's what's possible in a COP. And that, in a way, lifts all boats. Because if you have a vote and you have a portion of the world that doesn't want to go with that, then it's easy for them to kind of say, oh, we didn't vote for that. But no, there was a collective consensus decision to go in this direction. So I think that's what makes it different. That's what makes it historic. But it's clear that now it's about, okay, I mean, I've already said, okay, which financial sector actors are we meeting with tomorrow? Which companies are we going to go in which way? Because now it needs to be translated down into that corporate and national policy making and the corporate policy, decision making, I think, in order to make sure that it translates into the transformation. I mean, there was a study that was released at the beginning of the COP about positive tipping points. And I think that's very important because I think in the areas of solar and electric vehicles, we've seen that, but now we need to translate into all of that. So, and I think, having been in the Pacific, I was trying to think about what it would be like for us here in Germany if we had to think about the non-existence of our country in a few years.
Yeah, okay. This really leads to another question that I have, like, in what relation do you see the German government's climate foreign policy strategy and the COP now? So how's the dynamic there?
Well, the COP is a place to implement our climate foreign policy. So I think what you see in the climate foreign policy is all these different goals around accelerating the energy transition, the accelerating action on nature, finance reform, all of those different, the Climate Club, which was also launched at the COP. And so in a way, these 2 weeks of COP negotiations are almost like, I don't know, a year of climate policy making, or 6 months at least. So it's a platform and a decision-making body where we can take all of the climate foreign policy activities, so our climate diplomacy of all the partnerships that we have and built over the year, the work on the global shield that was undertaken, on also on stability and on resilience. And that then, what I found was, by having done that over a year and implementing that over a year, then we could have different conversations and work differently with our partner countries, because it's not just words on a page. We actually are working in the implementation together. So it's almost like a place where we implement the climate foreign policy.
Okay, yeah, and speaking about implementation, and this might already be the last question here because we have to go to the panel, but how does all this relate to the new climate law in Germany? Because I mean, the SRU makes really clear that, like, the targets won't be enough to meet 1.5 our share, like, from Germany, and also, like, the Expertenrat der Bundesregierung is being clear about, like, all the measures, suppose there aren't enough to meet their own targets. So how does this relate?
Well, I think, in 2 years' time, I think making up an 80% gap in the implementation on these targets is a good start, and I think makes good progress moving forward for this government. We've been clear that there's more to be done. And I think that's also part of us looking at the outcomes from this COP and saying, okay, what does it mean for us at home? What does it mean for Europe at home? And it's clear that there's we're not all the way there yet, and that's why we'll keep working on it.
Yeah, but is it, like, already too much to be asked to stay on the 1.5? Because you also mentioned that this is still in the paper and in the statements and so on. But I mean, if we just have a look at how long the budget for 1.5 is still gonna last, like in 2025 in Brazil, it's almost used up. So how was this addressed in those meetings?
Well, I think it was addressed by having very strong text. I mean, many of you, I'm sure, saw the text in between. There was little urgency. So the urgency, the science, the dates on 2025, the 1.5 throughout, the guidance in para 29 on, or 28 on all of those energy and also on the forestry, that is to keep 1.5 in sight. That's what an international agreement and decision can do. Now we have to take that with the fire in our belly and make it happen.
Thank you very much. So, and now I switch seats and maybe also Mike. Would like to ask our panelists on stage. There at first we do have Vishwas Chitale. He is leading the climate resilience team at the Council of Energy, Climate and Water in New Delhi in India. Please join us. He's focusing on assessing risks and building resilience. And also before working with the climate resilience team, he was leading the artificial intelligence program at the German Development Corporation, GIZ, in New Delhi, where he worked on artificial intelligence for climate action. So thanks for being here. And then we do have Dr. Florian Krampe. He's director of the Climate Change and Risk Program at Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, SIPRI. And he focuses on peace and conflict research, environmental and climate security, and international security. So thanks for your time. And then Kira Winkel, you already saw her today. She's the director of the Center for Climate and Foreign Policy at the DGAP, and she is also co-chair at the federal government's Advisory Council on Civil Crisis Prevention and Peacebuilding, and a guest researcher at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, PIC. So thanks for being here. And, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I just offered it to Jennifer Morgan after this long speech. So I would like to start with a quick round where you all just answer one question briefly. And this is, as we already said, it's kind of been historic, but it's also not been enough. And from your point of view, what was the most important thing? What stuck to you? Maybe you can start.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me on this panel. So thanks to DGAP for that. So I think we all might have looked at the news. Some say it's historic. Also, as the State Secretary highlighted, that historic yet inefficient or insufficient. But I mean, see, when we talk about climate action and when we talk about equitable climate action, it has to have mitigation, adaptation, and now loss and damage for response and recovery. But in our view, all three of them should get enough and equal weightage because all of that is necessary in the current world. We cannot just focus on mitigation and totally ignore adaptation, because if you see just a case from India, India is putting a lot of efforts in its renewable energy, but the cyclone Biparjoy that came in July caused a damage of around 500,000 euros just in one district of Gujarat, totally damaging the solar panels in that district. So when we are talking about mitigation, we also have to understand the adaptation for mitigation. If we are investing so much in the clean energy sector, are we climate proofing this infrastructure? So that's why the adaptation should get its seat on the table and should have at least 1/3 of the climate finance is needed to go there. Like we look at adaptation gap report of this year, it shows huge gap in adaptation funding. And I think that next COPs should really address that. So this year, one important aspect that has happened is the global goal on adaptation. Now we have somewhat at least representation of adaptation in the global context there with some vague frameworks so far. But yes, but now it's the countries that should take up the role, active role in planning the adaptation in their own country at various scales and should report back on the global stage that we have done this much was the need for adaptation. This is what we need for next 5 years or so to take the discussion even more aggressively forward. So that's my take.
Thank you. Mr. Krampe, what did you say? How did you experience this COP?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation and for the opportunity to be here. And thank you for your keynote and also the leadership, of course, in the negotiations. It's easy for us to sit here. We don't have to sit in the through the nights at COP and come to a consensus document. I think, I mean, you mentioned the tagline, historic. It's a historic shift, but it's not too late. I took actually away the word, it's too late, but finally, which is certainly better than too little, too late. So we're making progress, and I think Professor Lisa Schipper summarized it on Twitter actually nicely, reflecting on COP, which was like, well, it's obviously not enough, but maybe that is simply what we can get in the current political context. And that is where I want to talk a little bit more about being the peace and security perspective here on the panel, which is that we saw at COP for the first time a declaration. First of all, we saw a peace day, and we saw a joint declaration on climate relief, recovery, and peace. And I think that is really important because, yes, we need to take the climate vulnerable countries with us, but we also need to take conflict-affected and fragile states specifically with us, where the double burden of climate change and conflict is compounding the hardship of already highly vulnerable populations, right? And that is something we see, we know, and we increasingly face. So it is really great to see that peace was put on the agenda, and specifically a positive spin on the situation, because there is so much possibilities and opportunities in that, which I think the declaration captures. We know we need a just transition, but we also need a peaceful transition. We need to make sure that we come to a point, Jennifer Morgan mentioned the positive tipping point study, right? We need to make sure that we have interventions that are peace positive, right? That we actually start to realize that we can, in these contexts, or we can not only, but we have to, in fragile and conflict-affected states, to do three things at the same time. We have to adapt, we have to develop, and we have to deal with the peace-building issues and the conflict issues. And actually, there are ways of doing that and getting interventions where we get 3 for 1, which is a great deal, in my opinion. If you look at the COP declaration, I think there are 3 things that are really important. If you're realizing these opportunities, yes, we need finance, we need ownership, and we need knowledge. I think on the finance side, there is an opportunity here, to increase finance, but also to learn to be smart with the finance. And I think there is an important learning element that we need moving forward on learning from peace builders, implementing bringing finance into a conflict-affected state is not easy. We see that typical climate finance stays away from it. So what can we learn from peace-building actors in this space, bringing this in? How can we bundle funds that are not, like, as I said, these are three-in-one deals, essentially, like, but we are pretending that, I mean, all our finance streams are very, very separate and siloed. So how can we bundle them and bring them together and get more bang for the money? How can we be deliberately inclusive and listen to the needs of the populations affected? And how do we generate the necessary knowledge of having these type of interventions that are peace positive and are not damaging more and contributing to conflicts rather than resolving them? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kira Finke, like, you've been at COP as well. How did you experience the?
Yeah, I mean, it was again a big show, I would say. That was my first impression, I must say. There was a lot of side events, a lot of good activities, very tense negotiations. And of course, it's somehow a positive development that we had the Peace Day, we had a Health Day. I mean, I'm not against peace nor health, right? There was more culture involved, but all of this positives came also with a little bit of the feeling: is it somehow a distraction from the main question, which is fossil fuel phase out? And in the best case, all of these activities involving more actors from the peace, involving more actors from the health sector, etc., involving more cultural actors, they feed into accelerating this transition, and they feed into making it more equitable, more just, etc. But in the worst case, it leads to, oh, we're doing all these things, but the main thing is not sufficiently done. And so this was my my concern at the COP. With the outcome, I think we can work with it. So I think in that case, it was not a complete letdown. And I think this is the important takeaway that, yeah, climate protection is not being implemented at the COP. It just is a framework, and it's a framework convention. Obviously, we have to implement it nationally with partners, etc. So, so my look on the COP is mixed, I would say. One positive thing is that, yeah, multilateralism is still alive in this poly-crisis, in these deep rifts, in times of war in many regions of the world, including in Europe. And I think this is a very positive takeaway and a real achievement of the negotiators, that they were able to bring any agreement that is somehow still acceptable. And I think this should be acknowledged.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to announce that at the end, you will be able to ask some questions. So you can already think about this. Also, if you're just joining us online, you can post them in the chat, and I'm going to read them out. And I also would like you to react to each other, right? To have a really lively discussion. And maybe one question, you said it was kind of a show. So how did you perceive the level of lobbying and also, let's call it like greenwashing at the COP? Because there have been many like Guardian articles about how numbers of lobbyists doubled and tripled there.
So, I mean, just to clarify this a little bit, what I meant is you arrive at the venue. It's a huge venue. It, I think, was the largest one ever where COP was held. It was very, very well made in a way, very impressive. But also it comes with this question of what can we actually deliver in the setting? Yeah, is it just the setting, or is it? Are we getting to the depth of it? And of course, it was quite disturbing to hear the amount of fossil fuel lobbyists who are engaged in these conversations. Now, the counter argument is, of course, they need to be in the boat. Industry needs to be in the boat in order to facilitate this transition. And I think it's a legitimate argument. At the same time, the preservation of industry, fossil fuel industry, has often been weighed against the question of climate impacts affecting the most vulnerable. And we have, in the last decades, favored the existence, the continued existence of fossil fuel industry over the continued existence, for example, of the small island states. And this is, of course, not acceptable. And the question is, what is the common ground with some actors, and is there legitimate interest in really transitioning away now or phasing out? And I think it is very different for different actors. And also with regards to carbon capture and storage, also a couple hundred of lobbyists or experts or whatever you want to call it in this area have attended the COP. And of course, this influences the decision making. At the same time, you also had a lot of NGOs present. And so it's a question like you allow both to be in the venue. Is it fair, or is it still unbalanced? Because of course, there's a lot more money with some of these industry representatives.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about the loss and damage fund again. And yeah, we already said, okay, it's been a breakthrough. It's been really surprising and very positive. But I would like to hear your assessment, Vishwas. Like, what do you think? How would you rate this in on, yeah, the light of the developments to date, but also in the light of what will be needed? There had been some studies out saying, well, this is like 0.2% of what we will need per annum. So how do you see this?
Yeah, thank you. So yes, I think, I mean, it was a big achievement on day one to get some agreement on it and like to launch it. But I think, of course, again, if we refer to the phrase that it's insufficient in a way that there is no clear framework to assess the loss and damage. And a lot of people are focusing on this as a response and recovery fund. Basically, after a climate impact hits a place and there is a loss, a lot of economic loss, life loss, etc. So this fund could provide some initial support immediately after the disaster. And then there will be detailed assessments of how much loss has happened, and then the country will get next installment, etc. But I would have liked to see at least some already implementing it or testing it out, or learning from what countries are relying on currently, what kind of methods they are using. Is there a global agreement on those methods to understand what a loss means, economic loss means? And also loss and damage also talks about non-economic losses, which is really a gray area. So if they were going to launch it this year at COP, uh, there could have been much more efforts in understanding and explaining this to LDCs, that okay, you need a capacity internally in your country to quantify what a loss and damage mean for you. And then, is there an agreement on that definition? Do we even have a definition? A lot of countries don't still understand what it will cause in terms of response and recovery, and what goes in there and what doesn't qualify for that fund. So I think still it's a long way to go from here in order to mobilize the funds. I mean, yeah, of course, now we have something 875 million USD as a right now the commitment for loss and damage. A lot of amount also needs to come in there, but at the same time, you also need the countries to build their own capacity, or a global framework is needed in order to quantify who will get it, how it will be deployed. Right now, I think World Bank is going to host it for some years, and then after that, which will be the global agency who will host the fund? What is the mechanism of immediate release of funds after the disaster? What is the framework? What is the timeline in which the countries are supposed to give you quantified estimates of losses, etc.? I think there needs a lot of work in that space. So good start, but yes, again, countries will have to pull up their sleeves and do the assessments and strongly propose that, okay, let's agree on this. So I hope that in the next COP, we have some kind of frameworks, some of the countries coming together and saying that, yeah, I mean, at least LDCs, at least, and LMDs. So at least they should come forward saying that we did internal assessment, we need this for this kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think loss and damage is also related to the security aspect, isn't it? So maybe you could elaborate on this, how you see this?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, and it is one of the entry points for peace positive outcomes. The adaptation needs in these contexts are so difficult, but you can also, or so tremendous, but you can also imagine if you're trying to implement a climate adaptation project somewhere in India compared to somewhere in Somalia, it's different, right? It's, I mean, from a whole security situation when you simply can't even be, I mean, you have to return to the UN compound at night to, you know, it's a really complicated situation. I think just one thing to add on the points on loss and damage and the fund, and then maybe some brief thoughts on what Kira mentioned as well. I think it's also important well, pledges are great, but pledges aren't transactions. Right, and we know also the reality is that we pledge more than we in the end transfer, really, right? So I think that is great. There a lot of great things have happened at COP, and there are a lot of positive opportunities, but the proof is in the pudding, right? We need to see what of that is going to be really implemented, and who is implementing it, who is operationalizing it, who is doing the assessments, and what is really ending up in the field, because we can all declare great things, but doing them is something completely different. And I think it's interesting in that side, of course. I mean, like if you look at the amount of the industry that is at COP, right, and the fossil fuel industry specifically, and the deals that I think starting in Egypt already, and now even accelerating. And I think now we are at a participantship of 70,000 people going to COP. It's absolutely crazy. There is a repulsive element to that. But it's also, I think, an interesting realization that it is the COP led by a fossil fuel CEO that has is then the first that is phasing out fossil fuels, right? So in peace and conflict, we know sometimes you need the hardliners in government to actually come to an agreement. So maybe there's something set for that. While we are probably uncomfortable with that, but I think there's something to see, and I guess Azerbaijan will be the next highlight.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just one thought. I mean, you could also interpret the great interest of the fossil fuel industry in these COPs, or the increasing interest, with the fact that it's really now getting to their existence. Yeah, so that they are taking, maybe they didn't attend, I don't know, 20 years ago, because they didn't take it serious. And now it is quite serious also for them. And so maybe one could also interpret it this way, that there is this increased interest in these negotiations because it's the tides are changing. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe one aspect that we didn't mention by now. You already said like pledges are one thing, actions are another. Maybe this one goes to Kira as well. Can you say anything about what this COP meant for emissions reduction? Does this COP have any results here?
Yeah, I mean, of course, the results on transitioning away and the naming of fossil fuels in the text is essential. It was overdue, as you said, but it is essential now, and making it somehow more tangible. And then, of course, the renewable targets. Yeah, I think this is also very important observation. But we need both. No, I think, and this is also something where I think Germany can really use its experience and also promote its experience, for example, with the Coal Exit Commission, and talk about it, because I think this is the right way. And I think it's a better way than, for example, the IRA, yeah, which is just subsidizing renewable technologies, etc., which we hope that there will be somehow the edging out of the other technologies. But I think a clear phase-out date for fossil fuels, a clear commitment to this phase-out is more significant than just pushing the renewables. Because of the tightness of the carbon budget. This is the main argument here, that we cannot run these two systems, fossil and renewable systems, in parallel for so long anymore, because we will just overshoot the budgets significantly, perhaps even the 2-degree budget. No? So I think this is the main argument here. So yes, some progress, but in the end, it's, of course, it is the cities, it is the institutions, it is the individual households who need to make this transition. And this global framework, yeah, that was hard negotiated, it can only give the impulse, yeah, it can only give the framing. And now the implementation again, and I think this is why Germany also really needs to continue, and this is why I think the climate foreign policy strategy is so good, needs to continue in this partnership approach with getting other partners on board, exchanging knowledge, also maybe on the more local level and not only national, but also inducing this local level dialogue between cities.
Yeah, just to mention, the Climate Action Tracker tried to put these mixed signals into numbers and was saying that the warming projections have not improved since Glasgow. So at the moment, we're rather going towards 1.5 degrees Celsius at the end of this 20. 2100, 21. End of the century, I'm so sorry. And it's interesting because it says like, okay, it's 1.0 degrees warmer than we had the projections in Glasgow, because we didn't see any really ambitious NDCs, so like new targets being put on the table. And this is just going to happen in Brazil, or 9 to 12 months before. This is the statement that these NDCs should be published 9 to 12 months before COP30. And yeah, as we said, the budget is not really being enough. So I just wanted to point this out. But we want to talk about adaptation. And maybe you could just like give your insights about what was the most important outcome here.
Yeah, I feel so happy that she mentions we want to talk about adaptation. So thank you for that. So yes, I mean, see, this year, if you refer to IPCC's social media or WMO social media, almost every month was the hottest on record so far, starting from February. Every month we were getting notification that this is the hottest month in record so far in India, in like other developing countries also. In we have seen what has happened in Europe during the summer. So I think adaptation is immediately needed on various levels. I mean, of course, we understand that, yeah, in a country like India or in a lot of developing countries, nationally there are policies and frameworks which talk about adaptation, how to take it further, and then it is given to provinces or states to activate it, do the assessments at their own level in terms of understanding the climate risks at various sectors like agriculture, water, etc., and to plan for their own adaptation strategies at the state or province level. Now, what happens is if the states do not have enough capacity, is the national government really worried about it? That, okay, are they capable to do the assessments on their own, or we need to provide a guidance, or there should be someone who should help them out? Do they have assessments, do they have capacity to even do the financial assessments, like what is needed in agriculture sector for climate change adaptation? Are we just focusing on drought resistant varieties, or at some point that's not going to be sufficient, so we have to really have a controlled agriculture ecosystem? And the financials are very vague. So I mean, yeah, just at CEW we helped state of Maharashtra to develop it, so that's why I know in detail how the process goes and all. So what has happened is, if a state is proactive and takes it on their own in order to come up to a point that which activity will need how much of finance for achieving it by 2030, and then puts it together as a climate budget of the state, then you get an understanding that how much is your current allocation for different sectors for a particular annual outlay, and how much amount you are claiming for next 7 years, and divide it by per year figure to come up to a per year figure. Then it comes to, like, yeah, currently Maharashtra has roughly 12% of its annual outlay that can be identified as climate budget, but that's not sufficient. So we are trying to get it to at least 40% of annual outlay. That's where the adaptation will show its impact. So when we talk about global goal on adaptation, giving us an opportunity to develop the frameworks for climate risk and vulnerability assessments, and develop indicators and frameworks for thematic sectors like agriculture and water, which are really important for survival. I mean, yeah, you cannot work without those. So we have to work together in terms of forming these frameworks, understanding what it means for a, say, dry zone of India, in terms of climate change impacts or climate change adaptation for agriculture, versus a mountain state in India, which will be totally different, versus a state that is facing also coastal intrusion because of sea level rise. So it's really at that subnational level you have to think about these processes. And I would suggest that we should really go down one level at local level, because that has been a big gap. Locally led adaptation, no one really understand what it means. And when we talk about financing, I think that's where a significant role of climate finance comes in there, to ensure that locally people are able to adapt to the conditions. Because at state also you will have so much of diversity in the climate, you cannot say that this will work for all the districts in my state. You have to go to the local level, understand their dimensions, understand the needs that they have at the local level for climate change adaptation, and all of this should reflect in the state level action plans. And also some of the cities in India are making some I mean, climate action plans, etc. But of course, coming to the mechanisms that we have, like GCF, for example, has a very complicated process and very lengthy process to get access to the funds. So if a municipal corporation wants to access funds from GCF, the understanding that they have on how to access is zero. So how we enable them, how we build their capacity in order to understand what it will take for them to access these funds. But at the same time, these funds and the frameworks that are there to disburse the amounts for adaptation finance needs to be relooked into and need a big reform. Because if you are planning for a climate risk assessment in 2023, if you get your fund in 2027, it's of no use. So we have to have rapid assessments, rapid disbursement of funds based on quantitative assessment. And I think all of this needs a lot of looked into international policies, state policies, and a big reform.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's also something that I read about the adaptation discussion. Like, okay, it wasn't very concrete, the outcome, but there had been some reasons for this, as you said. And this might be also some aspect for security aspects, like, okay, in adaptation and also maybe peacekeeping, there might be not one size fits all recipe or something. So how do you see this?
I guess it's a general lesson that we learned from peace building more generally in the last 30 years is that cookie cutter approaches don't work. And I think that's why the local level and the assessment side is so important to emphasize, right? Because we need to understand what the needs are. And if you extend that to the peace context, we need to realize that because of the impact of climate change, we're having different peace needs, right? And that is something where adaptation is so important. I think the point also in the difficulty, but the importance of flexibility, iterative, adaptive approaches to adaptation, because it is so different depending on the context. But we need to set up the funding, but also the implementers to succeed in that by giving them the flexibility to adapt, to implement proper adaptation in this context. Just one point on the finance. If you look at the four of the biggest grants, we see that 1/80 of that money goes to conflict-affected states, right? And as I said, that is some of the states that are so important. Another factor that I would like really to see, and I don't hear people really talking about it, is regional adaptation plans. National adaptation plans are great, and yes, we need to get down to the local level. But Nepal building dams has certain implications for India. Turkey building dams as part of the national adaptation plan has severe implications for Iraq, right? So where is this type of synergetic thinking that we to overstretch the cliches, but like, climate knows no borders. And where are we realizing that? And where are we thinking about coming to these synergetic outcomes that provide the best possible outcomes for a whole region? So I think regional adaptation plans is some of the next really important steps in getting there.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we need a much stronger focus on the poor and look at solutions that have worked in very poor contexts. So my research is on climate change and migration, and there we have visited in field visits some of the poorest parts of this planet. And this is maybe also why there was this sort of questioning for me at the beginning here as to how, in which settings we negotiate this problem. Because who's at the forefront of this crisis are the people who are living in slums, are the people who are living in rural areas where there's little food security, where there's extreme temperatures, where there's tropical cyclones, etc. So to look more closely at these populations and involve them more at the negotiations. And partially there was some representation happening, more refugees taking part, etc. I think this is very key when also looking at climate adaptation, because it's not only how to make a city like Berlin or Munich or maybe Dubai resilient to ever more extreme temperatures. It's also the question how the secondary cities, where maybe a lot of people who will be displaced also in the context of this crisis will house, how they can be able to adapt, because they will not be able as of today. And then the question also becomes is, are we really going to stop climate change at the upper warming limit of the Paris Agreement or not? I think this is, and I think this commitment was reiterated at the COP, but the actions now really need to follow. And maybe we need something more of a year-to-year planning now that the carbon budget is getting smaller and smaller. Maybe more of an annual planning rather than we will do this by 2065 or something.
Yeah. Okay, we are already getting towards the end, and this would be your opportunity to ask questions. Oh yeah, we already have one. So we do have a microphone that's coming around, and you can just like say your name and where you're from maybe, and then really we try to take as many questions as possible. So I would like you to ask very concise questions and also use a question mark at the end. And also when you're joining digitally, you can just like put your questions into the chat and I'm gonna read them out. So.
Thank you. My name is Sabine Minninger. I'm a Senior Policy Advisor on Climate Change with a German development organization called Bread for the World. And we work in partnership with many organizations worldwide in the global south, particularly in these developed countries and African countries and small island development states. Together with them, I follow the COPs. Of course, I've also been now 16 days in Dubai. And as part of my job description, working for civil societies, you rarely hear me complimenting my government. That's not part of my work DNA. But before I go to that, I would like to say only one sentence to the fossil fuel lobby who was present there at the COP. And I think I speak here on behalf of the entire civil society delegation who was there, because I'm closely organized there in the Climate Action Network International with 1,900 organizations. And we have only one statement on that: keep the fossil fuel lobby out of this process. And that is not unfair, not undemocratic. It's just because they're not helpful. You're not hosting a conference to combat cancer and inviting then the cigarette lobby. So we have a clear mandate to be there, and the mandate is to implement the Paris Agreement. So we are not inviting people who are blocking this, and their intention is to block. I'm not speaking, don't invite the fossil fuel industry. That is something else, because if they want to be there and to turn their business to become more green, to become do the shift from fossil to renewables, they are very welcome to be there, but not if they're the lobby to keep the fossil fuel industry. So, and that is very, very clear for us. And about now the Loss and Damage Fund, my German government, who rarely hears me applauding them, played a very crucial and a very positive role in the last 2 years. The first was that Jennifer Morgan played a crucial role in getting at that point that the world agreed last year actually to set up a loss and damage fund. And now also the other ministry, the BMZ, played a very crucial role now also in getting the fund operationalized. But, and now comes my big question to all of you.
Thank you.
And to my German government, of course, in the first role is it was like, my calculation was less than 800 million US dollar, but it's okay. So still, that's a huge gap. The UNCTAD says that we need at least 115 billion US dollar a year to fill the fund. We have a massive gap there, and we don't know how to fill it. There is no plan to do it. In industrialized countries who are in the first role of responsibility, refuse to go to have a self-commitment to pay in, and then rich developing countries who are oil exporting, such as the Emirates or Qatar or Saudi Arabia, or high emitting emerging economies like China also refused to pay in. And so that is my question: how do we fill this gap? Because at the moment it's an empty shell.
Thank you. Here's one question in the chat that really fits well to this, so I'm going to take this as well. It's from Ursula, and she asks, what are the main components of the implementation of the COP28 decision? Can Germany fulfill their financial obligations taking into account the Schuldenbremse? So we don't really have German government here on the panel, so Kira, this might both go to you. What do you think?
Yeah, of course, Germany could just increase the carbon price and then pay for the transition that way. I mean, it's quite simple, and some of the steps have been taken in this direction. Yeah, I think the question is not whether we are going in the right direction. It's the question of accelerating now what we are doing. And if you look at the carbon price, it's much too low. The Umweltbundesamt, UBA, has put out a carbon price assessment based on the damages caused between, I don't know, 250 and 800 euro, depending on how much you account for future damages. And we are very far away from this. Now there's a slight increase planned, and of course you cannot induce such a high carbon price all at once. But I think more communication on what actually the damages are that we are causing with our current engagement on the fossil fuels is needed, so that people are understanding that we are creating a lot of external costs with our way of running our economy at the moment.
Thank you. Here are more, maybe just first here.
Thank you. My name is Promit. I'm from ORF based in India. It's a think tank based in India. Since we are in Germany, in the EU, I can't resist asking this question. I think this year, the EU and Germany in particular has, I mean, sitting where we were, we've been quite happy with their engagement, you know, the cohesive kind of positioning at the COP, etc. But I think there was one elephant in the room, and being in Dubai, this was very clear, and that was the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. I think even in the past, if we've seen EU's engagement in terms of climate finance, it's still one of the geographies that has done well. So if there is any trust between the global north and the south, I would say the EU is better than the rest, not great, but better than the rest. So I think, but this is going to be a real challenge. The CBAM sitting in India or in the global south, to us seems a little bit like climate colonialism, if you excuse the term. And we've seen this year at the COP, a lot of the global south countries kind of pushing back on this. In fact, they wanted to include that countries should not include unilateral trade measures into the text, etc. Sitting in India, there are two reactions. One is from the actual businesses who are kind of keen to engage because they see that at some point they will have to decarbonize, and they see this as an entry point to do that. For governments, it's a complete no-no because I think there's a lot of baggage in terms of what has happened previously at the WTO in terms of when a global south tries to enforce these kind of tariff measures in our own country. So there's a big no-no. So my question is, what is the, you know, as you kind of have worked on Germany's climate foreign policy strategy, what's the engagement with the rest of the global south on CBAM going to look like? And I went to a few events in the EU pavilion, etc., where it seemed like this is our structure, we will implement it, the rest of the world will have to follow. And somehow there's a belief that this is the EU's gift to the world and that this will help the world decarbonize. It won't have any costs to the rest of the world. But I don't think that's the view. But I think there is a middle ground there. So how does the CBAM feature in Germany's as well as the EU's climate foreign policy going forward?
There's someone of you. Yeah.
I mean, maybe I can start, and Florian, if you want to jump in, or Vishwas, if you want to share your account. I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of the German government, obviously, but I strongly reject the notion that this is climate colonialism. I mean, climate colonialism is when others are polluting the atmosphere and the impacts are emerging in your country. And this is what is happening now, and CBAM is a way to combat exactly this situation. And it is an instrument that will move Europe more towards decarbonization. So I think it's a crucial instrument. And unfortunately, we will have to induce measures that are not voluntary anymore. Because if we are just on this voluntary basis, which is what is happening in UFCCC, that everything is voluntary, there's these commitments that every country does through the NDC mechanism, everybody throws something in the pot, and we have seen now since Paris, 8 years, it's not enough. So the question is, those countries who are moving ahead with more ambition, will they be able to move ahead without losing substantial parts of their industry? Because if this is what's going to happen, then nobody will follow suit. And the instrument of CBAM to protect certain industry doesn't apply to all industries. Certain sectors of the European industry is one measure to do so. And I think the engagement on this is ongoing.
Thank you.
Can I
yeah.
briefly? I decided I want to be uncontroversial today, but so I'm trying. Let's see how it works out. And I fully get that, and I think that is really important, right? That this is not climate colonialism. But the problem is, and that is a problem if we take the bigger political picture and global politics and the relations to the global south, is if it is perceived like that, right? That doesn't mean it is, but the perception is like that. And we see that, now you mentioned it, we see that with multiple other policies, right? And I think that is something really important where we, as Germany, as Europe, as the West, or whatever you want to call it, have to really start thinking. And you see that with a lot of the political discussions that are going on currently, right? That there's a really important time to rethink. And I don't think we need to, I mean, we are probably seeing that from a pro-Global South perspective in general, but I think there is something really going wrong, and that we need to start to really rethink. And part of that, I'm sorry, yeah, is engagement with bad guys, right? And that is easier for me because I'm coming from the peace and conflict field, right? At peace negotiations, you're gonna have multiple bad guys sitting around the table. But we need these conversations. There is something where we need to start to rethink and start to get together. I think there's another point that we need to find probably another thing than coming to a COP 100 whatever countries agreement negotiated, right? There must be other ways of breaking the collective action problems that are so inherent in the whole climate debate. And you know, we can't just always go ahead and be like, well, but you also emit. It's like somebody needs to start, right?
I just want to add one observation. I think it's important. I mean, you painted a broad picture, and that's fair. But of course, there is no homogeneous West and there's no homogeneous global South. And I think we also need to recognize the inequalities that exist within states of the West, within states of the global South, and also which interests are pushing for a framing of the CBAM, of other parts. And I'm not saying that you personally are pursuing this, but I'm just saying that there are some forces that are pushing this framing of climate colonialism, of colonialism per se, with anything that is proposed on the global climate issue by countries in Europe, for example. And this is also framing that is emerging from Russia. Who has invaded another country, which you could also consider a form of not only colonialism, but a form of aggression. Yeah, so I think it's very important to also look a bit deeper into this discourse, not discounting for the concerns that are very legitimate connected to this, but also see the inequalities that we need to address when combating climate change. The political dependencies of certain states on others, and also how do we bring, again, those around the table that don't have any voice in this, and how can they be protected from climate impacts and also from sort of the burdens of the transition.
Thank you. I've got another question from the chat that kind of adds on it, and maybe you can take it, Vishwas. It's from Janet Süß, and she asked, what have been the reactions of other member states of the EU or international partners towards Germany's new foreign policy strategy on climate? Are there any criticisms, e.g., having a look at the moralizing approach without reaching climate goals domestically is the question. I mean, was it even perceived in India or?
No, not really per se. Yeah. No, I mean, because, I mean, as you also mentioned initially, I worked with GIZ in India, and I understand that German government has a lot of investments that are planned in the adaptation sector in India. I mean, looking at the Global Sustainable Development Partnership that has committed a huge amount of investments to go in, not an investment, but yeah, funding to go in by 2030. So I think so far, uh, also for the developing world, whoever from the developed nations takes the first seat and, like, at least show the path to the other countries. So as I understood also from Germany's interventions in EU and the dialogue that was, I mean, that helped facilitate actually getting some stronger language in the negotiation text. So I feel, yeah, I mean, Germany is doing its best to address these challenges at the global level. At some times, it's not always possible to achieve everything domestically, but also at the same time, you have to commit for the global good or for the global action. So it's difficult to manage that balance between domestic versus global, but I think we all are moving in that direction, in the right direction in order to achieve that action. Just to reflect on, like, one of the missing points in this whole discussion, how do we bring in private sector in the finance? So I think that's the biggest challenge that everyone has right now and is facing. And I think all the countries, I don't know how it has reflected in Germany's foreign policy or foreign climate policy, but I think that is something that we all need to work together in order to activate that channel, convince the private sector to put in money in the adaptation finance, because otherwise this gap of adaptation finance will not be fulfilled in the timeline that we are expecting it to.
Okay, thank you. We started like 3 minutes late, so maybe we have one last questions, and the person, just keep it short, please.
Right. Christian Deutschmann, I'm here with Stop Ecocide Germany. I'd like to address Kira Winke because DGAP has been advocating for the use of law, international law, especially also maybe the idea of ecocide as being used as another instrument to advance climate protection measures. How would you evaluate the Klimaaußenpolitik-Strategie in that regard? How does it reflect on different dimensions of international law? Thanks.
I mean, the question of ecocide is not one that Germany will alone determine. It's a question how this will be taken and integrated into international law, right? So, and I see in the government different positions on this, whether this is the way to move forward. And of course, on the European level, there is already some instruments to really address larger scale environmental crimes, which is what ecocide in the end does. I think overall in the space of time, we will move in this direction to make the large scale destruction of environments, of large scale ecosystems, international crime. But I think it is still a ways away from that. Just to clarify, DGAP doesn't have any institutional position. We have individual researchers that can propose certain recommendations. And I personally think a move in this direction could benefit clarifying the gravity of the destruction that we're currently doing. So I personally think this would be a good move, but just making clear that we do not have any institutional positioning on this.
So thank you. Unfortunately, we already have to come to an end. And before I really say the last words, I'm just gonna give them to Kira.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity, because I would like to introduce our newest publication. I think there's maybe one left to look at outside. This was due to a printing error, but nevertheless, we will have more at the next event, so you have to come back. It's right now only available in German, but online you can already find it in English. It's about key terms of climate foreign policy. So it has a very nice layout, and it has a lot of topics on energy security, common but differentiated responsibilities, what is a business as usual scenario, climate migration, what is LULUCF, what are NDCs. So if you ever wondered what it is all about, take it into your hand or click at it online and read through it. And I think it's a very nice product of our collaboration with the German Foreign Office. It's not definitions, it's more like really our take on these topics. And there's one element in it that I just want to mention. If you go through the alphabet at H, it's hope is in there as well. So as a key ingredient for climate foreign policy. And yeah, I just want to thank my team and also take the opportunity for them to stand up, please, because they made this whole process possible. Tim, yes, Loyal, Mechtel, Leonie, Mahialia, please. Thank you. Abdullah, thank you. And of course, also Team DGAP, I really, I'm quite grateful for this opportunity to make this dialogue process.
Thank you. Many thanks also to all the three of you. So thanks for your interesting insights and also the discussion, the lively one. I really like that. Also, many thanks to you, dear guests and members of the DGAP, for your interest and your questions. And also on the behalf of the German Council on Foreign Relations, I would like to thank the Federal Foreign Office for its support and excellent cooperation on working on the strategy. And I would also like to thank the State Secretary and her team. And I also would like to thank the events team and the communications team here at the DGAP for organizing this event. And so, yeah, thanks. And now, thank you and goodbye, and have a good and relaxing Christmas and end of the year. And yeah, goodbye.